And here we are, episode 12, Future Forward.
Hey,
Greetings, Gene.
Baker's dozen or a dozen. Baker's would be one more.
Um, we have a lot to cover today, and some of it's pretty timely. So let's jump right into
Yeah,
segment one. Sundance. Uh, I have not been in a couple of years,
yeah.
but I get cold when I think about it. Um,
Yeah, especially with our spring weather here now.
but we have a particular Sundance. I mean, there's a lot going on at Sundance.
Yep.
This this is a complicated year for Sundance for sure. Um, no Harvey, the specter of digital floating in the air. But I think we should just dive into the thing that you and I are both most excited to talk about, which is tell our listeners the story of the documentary that you know from 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it isn't just digital looming, it's that documentaries have emerged, the good version of reality programming, as I like to call them. But there was a movie that hit Sundance, won the documentary first prize in, I believe, '08 or maybe '09, called We Live in Public. And for those that, know us and know SiliconAlley.com, they know that it is the story of Josh Harris, who actually was my partner and co-ran Jupiter before he left to become more of a do-it digital guy and created a company called Pseudo Programs, which was a wash and cash, was an early pioneer of video streaming and programming, and then disappeared. But Josh was reality programming before there was reality programming, and everything culminated for Josh in two things. One, a show called We Live in Public, where he wired his entire house with cameras, and he and his girlfriend lived out their life in front of what at the time was only a few hundred people at a time, but it made big news. And then he did an event called Quiet, which is still heralded in some art circles because it was a Y2K midnight art gathering. And this a very accomplished documentary filmmaker, Andy Timiner, worked with Josh to get all the footage that he had acquired over many years, added lots of interviews, and put a terrific narrative on it. And now it has been optioned and is looking like it is going to be a movie directed by Ben Stiller with none other than Jonah Hill starring as Josh.
So
So,
so I have a tricky question for you.
yeah,
Will it, like, 10 years ago, We Live in Public was shocking. It
yep.
was daring. It was the outer edges of the internet. I just wonder if today the things that we thought of as shocking 10 years ago will seem kind of pedestrian. Like, I
Yeah,
wonder if it's going to be a big story.
I think the answer is it would be if they tack too much only on that. I think even 10 years ago, it would not have been a modest mainstream success, or at least mainstream accessible, if there wasn't a lot of poignancy in it. The story of Josh and the very bizarre personal human nuttiness of him, I think gave it more fiber than the pioneer of, public facing, everything and the craziness of what happened. There was a good combination. So I'm hoping that making it a human story, this is one of those classic things where we know the story so well that it's less, because now we're talking about a work of art, about getting the details right, and more about creating a compelling work of art around it. Honestly, I could care less if it represents this or that accurately, as long as it makes a really good point. And there's a real good story or stories to be told, right? There have not been a lot of .com art that's been very good.
Uh, so here's my most optimistic and excited thought about this film. Josh has been kind of out of the mainstream for a bunch of years,
Hmm.
and he's in my mind, if this is an exciting second act for him, that would be really good. Like, it would be great for him to be able to get back into, I mean, his ideas about the internet are by no means old school. They were modern 10 years ago and they're modern today. And so the idea that he's going to be back on the media circuit and doing shows and being at film festivals and all that stuff, like it to me is just like exciting and positive and great. And
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's important to know that, Josh had his heyday really in the limelight and was a meaningful pioneer. And then there was a 5 or 8, 10 year break, and We Live in Public brought him out and carted him around and reinforced what Josh has always wanted to be, which is considered an artist. Now, that's a
yes,
dubious proposition, but he did end up creating something that has lasting value, and he was a steward and kind of a semi-producer in that sense. I think this is going to be a little bit of that again. Now, Josh has enough intelligence and enterprisingness and creativity to parlay it into something else new. I'm not sure what, if anything, he has up on his sleeve. I do know he's been doing a lot of writing lately. And so, I think the pressure to create another startup movement kind of thing, that's not going to work.
so Wired magazine has a piece in which they propose that this year's Sundance might be the most crucial yet. And I read it a little bit cynically because it seemed a little like clickbait. But
Yeah, it
I mean,
it does.
but we are at a funny moment for Sundance, right? I mean, Netflix is Netflix, Amazon is Amazon. Amazon just announced with some fanfare that they're going to move away from indie work and toward bigger. They're going to go from $5 million films to $50 million films,
Right.
um, which struck me as a little a little swerving around, you know.
Yeah, well, I think they have equal parts Game of Thrones and Marvel envy. They want gigantic franchises, and they're now doing the math that says well-regarded, modest successes are a dime a dozen, and it's sort of like startup world. We'd rather hit 1 out of 7 on the super blockbusters in the hopes that we'll have the next, Game of Thrones. I just want to say that I do think that it's a little bit of a tedious media rehash in the sense that between the Trump era and the Me Too stuff, and the intersection with Hollywood, it's whatever media event du jour that brings the community together is at that precipice, right? So Golden Globes, most of this I think is going to be a lead up to the Oscars in terms of like the real focus on the news dialogue around, are we really in a transition mode? But look, Sundance matters. It always has mattered. I think it's important because serious films, we think of it as a media event, but it's a little like the way CES is. Sometimes, what the heck is that? There's a lot of business getting done that we won't even know about until 9 months or 18 months from now.
So, one of the things that you're not hearing out of Sundance, and then we'll move on to our B segment, is, it seems like the whole VR, AR, Sundance owns the universe. I mean, I'm sure they've got a lot there, but I'm not seeing it make its way into my feed, which is interesting.
I think that I think Sundance, like mainline Hollywood, is a little retrograde on that stuff. I have a very, very good friend who's a pretty well-known screenwriter, and I've spent a lot of time asking him both about tech and about things like Sundance and what goes on, and is the YouTube world coming in, and he largely he says it's just not really. They might bring a few people in for consultants when they're going to have a VR thing in a movie, or they want to make sure they, paint the picture of 7 years from now, reasonably, credibly. But that stuff comes, it's an end run. It's going to end up coming because it's sort of forced on them or something explodes. We thought IMAX and 3D movies were dead and forgotten for years, and they still kind of are a little on the fringe, but big giant, colorful action movies kind of almost de facto have a pretty lucrative release and life in 3D and or IMAX. So, but that's not VR. You know, I'm saying that as an example of something from 20 years ago that's barely making it today.
Yeah, no. All right, so we'll move on from Sundance. So our weekly loving and hating. Tell me what we're loving this week.
Yeah. So, and there are times when I really love and really hate, and then there's sort of, you know, warm fuzzies and frustrations as the contrast. And this week, under loving or deep affection and concern is Wikipedia. You know, Wikipedia is one of those institutions, not just of the internet, but of really the world to me. You know, in a world of fake news, the methodology and the way in which wide, deep realms of knowledge are managed by a community in a reasonable way, anchored in what is missing from the news cycle right now, which is actual citations, right? Everything has to be based on a citation that's approved, and they're hodgepodges, but you know, it's really a miraculous thing. And so I never stop loving it, and I'm always a little concerned, just like with public television, because I don't think they've cracked the code on how to be, you know, a public trust, right?
Have you donated?
I've donated a few bucks here and there.
I give them a little money.
It's a little bit of yes and a little bit of the same guilt I feel, you know, on the NPR and PBS fund drives. And because we've got a lot of ground to cover, I'm going to transition into the hating it, and it's more of deep concern. And in this case, it's Twitter to me, because here's the thing with Twitter. Twitter is probably the most significant, deeply important and consequential things that have emerged in the last 10 years that I cannot imagine how the world could do without. And yet they're caught having to be a business, you know, and they struggle. You know, I believe Twitter is the nervous system of the media, the indie, the mainstream, and a few others. And it's the point, those of us that know how to get things around, you know, Twitter's like, you know, kind of almost the anchor in the de facto, even if things aren't experienced on there. I wish there was a way Twitter could become a kind of a public trust and be protected from having to do sponsored tweets and all the other crap that makes it wrong. And of course, navigating and managing it, just like with Wikipedia, is a very difficult issue. And I almost wish it could be done by committee or something, because as we're about to discuss, it's very hard to decide who should or shouldn't say is allowed, whether it's a post or it's a profile or, you know, whatever.
So I'll just go over your two really quickly. Wikipedia, you and I are aligned, loving. Twitter, hating, not so much.
No, I don't hate it. I don't mean I'm hating it. I'm hating its plight.
Well, look, I mean, you know, we're just coming off of the first year anniversary of the Trump administration and the first year anniversary of the Women's March. You know, we are living in complicated times where breaking things down into, you know, expletives and name calling and tweets and all these short little digital bursts does seem like there's a coarsening of public discourse that may never be recovered. And I don't know that Twitter knew that they were going to be the deliverer of that, but they certainly have become that.
Yeah, this is where you and I, we have historically disagreed a little on this. I mean, I think this is one of these inevitabilities, and Twitter just happens to be a vehicle that may or may not, you know, have accelerated it. But because it's given voice to so many, you know, there is an art or an elegance to Twitter that I do feel like isn't necessarily new. The above the fold, do you go beyond the headline is important and essential. And if things can't be reduced, now that doesn't mean that they can't be oversimplified. I think Twitter is two things. One, it's that briefness, and two, it's this nervous system past links idea that, the best tweets are the ones that are, a touchstone to somewhere else. That's what sucks about Trump and others is the linkless tweets. There is nothing behind it, right? It's the simplistic statement with neither citation, reference, provability, or depth. But that's life.
So TechCrunch has this headline that says Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are getting praised for steady progress.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yes. Right. Right. This is an actual new block, but it just follows from what we just did.
Yeah. First of all, what's interesting is if you listen to the three companies speak publicly about their progress, it really comes down to two things. We're throwing more people at it, more staff, more, and we're building better technology because net, we really want it to be automated.
Right, right. Well, look, the one to me is a given. For the longest time, they have not had enough staff on this stuff. If you're going to have stuff flow through there, even if you're not going to, they haven't been self-aware enough to even know what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Things need to be reported. Now, you and I know, going back to the 90s, bulletin boards and forums and message boards, there was always an elegance, that's my word of the day, of letting the community or a designated responsible person manage within those. They've never really adopted anything like that. It's become just too big business to do that. There'd be too many legal implications. But they just haven't staffed it well enough, much less what should they be doing. And I think it's notable that in the articles and what we're talking about is that, in Europe, there have been movements that have garnered some modest praise and confidence, whereas I'm not sure exactly what the details are that I'm aware of anywhere in this stuff, so.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the thing about hate speech is, there are some images and triggers and keywords that, that aren't that hard to find programmatically.
Right. Part of it is academic, yes. But the rest is hard.
So,
and what I'll say also, because why I wanted to mention Europe is Europe has a history in these matters of both being the most liberal and progressive, and because many of those countries are semi-socialist, very focused on protecting consumer rights. Antitrust tends to be led there now these days instead of in the U.S. But they also are a little bit of the complete opposite, which is very autocratic and believing they have the rights to just summarily make this happen, make this not happen, stop this, stop that. Whereas in the U.S., it's a very long and windy process that can get challenged in the courts. Not that that doesn't happen in Europe. I just think some of it's a little bit easier there and not necessarily accurate. But I don't know what it is. In some ways, it's more about accounts being killed than it is individual tweets or posts.
And by the way, let's at least separate out different people. So YouTube's response, which I find particularly interesting, is we're not going to censor anything. We're just going to build a firewall that protects advertisers from bad speech.
Right, which is a very convenient thing. But you're right. It's like each one of these guys is navigating the razor's edge of, are we a network? And we don't have to worry about, and obviously YouTube has a big history of this because the Viacom lawsuits and other things were 8 or 10 years ago. But then there's the other thing, which is the stuff that messes with advertisers. And there's a razor's edge here right now that Facebook is straddling, whereas Twitter and YouTube are firmly in the network side, and partly because YouTube wants to be like Netflix and Amazon and everywhere else. And then like in the behind the scenes here, they're going to start creating content themselves, and it's going to get really messy.
All right, which brings us to our third or fourth block, depending on how you're counting. So we're going to talk about YouTube, and we're going to talk about these what are they called? The pods,
Tide Pods.
so have you seen the video? Did you look at the video?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just so everyone knows, because I think most people know of this, and it is the silly make things explode, videos, but the ones that use Tide itself tend to be they've almost become branded in a way. And part of this, right to your last point, has come out of what most people agree must be a Procter and Gamble objection to their brand being used in a certain way or to make money or whatever. This is where it gets a little squishy in terms of the legality.
So here's why I find the Tide Pod Challenge thing so interesting. So first of all, let me get off my chest the thing I do not understand.
Right.
I get that they look like candy, but why in God's name Tide menu? Because there's been all these problems with kids, and they take these detergents and they put them in their mouth, and because they look like little sucking,
Yeah, for sure.
Why they don't put them in a brown? Like, I don't understand why the marketing guys win over the safety guys in saying, why don't we make these less attractive for small children to put in their mouth? But that's not the story here. I don't
Well,
quite
the
get it.
story is that it appeals unconsciously even to adults as candy, and they're not sure they want to give that up. That's the truth.
I guess. All right, but so YouTube
It's spark.
found that teenagers were daring each other to take these detergents and put them in their mouth. And YouTube's reaction is to take down these Tide Pod Challenge videos.
Right, right, right.
To me, this is the slipperiest of slippery slopes
Yeah,
because so much of what's on YouTube is dangerous.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, extreme sports is dangerous. Parkour is dangerous. I mean, when I start thinking about I think for YouTube to start to be in the digital nanny business is really, really nuts.
It's completely against their own, stated principle. I mean, they're, you know, now having standards and practices, and in my opinion, there's ways they could have done half measures, right? It might be something that you could suggest that not having the word Tide be in the headlines because that's a trademark, but that's just not the way published usage laws have worked. So I'm not saying that was an answer, but I think there's places I wish they would have explored versus just saying they can't do it, because immediately it's censorship. It just doesn't make sense.
So when I think about most of the YouTube videos that are memorable to me, there are things like wingsuit flights or crazy parkour building climbers, or I mean, like, wild, water skiing. Like, I mean,
Don't forget cats.
yeah, I don't watch cats
No, I
on
know. I'm just
YouTube.
saying these are things that, that are big drivers.
But I guess what I'm saying is, like, some of the stuff that I see on YouTube is so dangerous that I almost think it must be green screened, or the people who are doing it are just out of their mind.
Well,
Which
that is,
which doesn't make me, from an audience member, proud of what I find alluring, but I just I don't I'm closing my eyes and trying to imagine. And you're right. So you think it's the Tide brand people using their weight as ad buyers and saying,
uh, I don't know enough to know. This is just what has
no,
been
it's good
suggested.
conjecture though.
Yeah, but it's been suggested in some of the articles, and of course, nobody needs to be reminded that the biggest or close to the biggest advertiser in the world, is Procter and Gamble that owns Tide. And so, these are, we don't know what kind of strong arming is going on behind the scenes. And I'll also say there's some technical, interesting nuances, not the Tide Pod things, but extreme sports-ish stuff. This is all in a new renaissance because of GoPro and the kinds of things that people can now do, that creates pretty dramatic, footage, and it's very no hands. So I don't know. You just are not going to be able to. It's going to change who they are. There is no. The Pandora is long since completely been out of the box on this, and I don't really understand. This strikes me as something that if it got to be big enough news, it would force a gigantic retraction from them because I can't. There's no logic in it.
So to our fans who are listening and watching and want to do their own Tide Pod videos, my advice to you is use Facebook.
It's an interesting spin. I do like challenges, and this whole thing we just should have just mentioned. The ice bucket challenge and the things that go viral because they have a cumulative kind of power is not new and is a wonderful, kind of very internet thing. But it's in the spirit of teenagers to do a lot of I dare you kinds of things. And so there's a whole realm of this stuff that isn't necessarily just branded CPG products.
But if you float back to 30,000-foot view,
Yep.
YouTube is in this really interesting, complicated, maybe unsolvable place, which is they've got makers who want to make money, and
Yep.
they make money by generating traffic. They've got audiences that want to watch things that are daring and teenagery. And then they've got national advertisers that want clean, safe, well-lit, non-controversial, non-edgy. Like, that's just not, it's like running a restaurant and, serving caviar on the menu and having the audience want burgers.
No, there isn't the ability to monitor it enough. And we should mention that in the wake of all the Me Too and sexually inappropriate behavior, there have been a handful of major YouTube stars that have very quickly gotten in trouble because suddenly, this is a topic, that they're not allowed to get away with. So there is, scrutiny is a really interesting thing. And when you have completely open. Let's not forget also that YouTube is tacking in multiple directions. They're also investing in original content. Yep. They're also dabbling and trying to push people towards red. They're more clean, well-lighted place for money, overlay, which is really for cord cutters. But there's a lot going on there. Many, many, many billions of dollars per year just there.
We are out of time. It's been another fabulous show. By next week, we'll know more about the news coming out of Sundance. So maybe we'll do another recap of Sundance.
Yeah, for sure.
And future forward. Have a great week.
Okay, you too, Steve. Bye. Bye, everyone.